What you see here is just a very small sampling of what is available on Covenant Media Foundation. They have thousands of hours worth of lectures, seminars, and so forth from a multitude of people, to include Greg Bahnsen, on a multitude of topics: ethics, philosophy, theology, apologetics, you name it. Check them out at covenantmediafoundationnow.org, cmfnow.org.
To make innocent children suffer in that outhouse? I mean, is the unbeliever supposed to be impressed that God uses such a means to bring men to Himself? It seems to me, a most ineffective way for God to turn men to Himself. There ought to be a benevolent way for God to turn men to Himself. But more importantly, if evil is supposed to be the punishment for sin and God's warning against further sin, the distribution of suffering, we must recognize, is not proportioned to man's virtue. And if the distribution of suffering is not proportioned, then is God good after all? It seems like He ought to warn evil men more than He warns good men, or relatively good men. Moreover, why does God punish the wrong men? Why is it the Christian pastors have their houses destroyed in a tidal wave, as well as the prostitutes in town? Why do the good men have to suffer for the evils of others? Why do animals have to suffer, by the way? I mean, are they guilty? Why does God allow animals to be tortured if this is supposed to be a warning to men? So there's something inadequate about that. Well, then there are those who say, you have to have a stiff upper lip. You've got to really believe that, good's going to come of this. God works through evil. God is restraining evil, we are told, and God atones for our evil. Eventually, He will eliminate evil. Therefore, if you just understand the full scope of redemption, if you see that God is working through it, He is restraining it. It could be worse. He's going to atone for evil, has atoned for evil, and He will eliminate evil eventually. But you see, this apologetical approach is saying God's going to clean up the mess someday. But what's the problem? The question is, why did He allow the mess in the first place? Moreover, if we take the approach that says God's going to clean up the mess, that is, He's atoning for evil, will eliminate it, what are we to make of hell? What is accomplished by eternal torment? You see, it's not just that we have men tormenting men on earth in this day and age, but the Bible teaches that God will torment men eternally. He won't torment them for sinning eternally, but the torment will be eternal. And so the unbeliever, again, is not going to be very convinced by this approach. And then finally, there are those who say, and I think this is the most popular approach to the problem of evil, those in the evangelical church would say evil has its origin in the free will of man. C.S. Lewis, by the way, I'm going to be telling you something that I think is true and applicable in another context, but what C.S. Lewis has said is often pressed to service here. Lewis once commented that if God takes human dignity and freedom seriously, then when men decide to plant corn, He will not bring up strawberries. And that's an excellent point. Men must reap what they sow, if you want to use the biblical phraseology. Okay, so God gives man free will. God gives man the ability to follow Him, the ability not to follow Him in the garden. Man chooses not to follow Him. Now, if somebody complains against God at this point, many Christians will say, but don't you see, it's much better to have a world where men have dignity as free creatures and yet have chosen the evil than to make them automatons, to make them robots, to make them so subject to God's direction that they have no individual dignity, they have no freedom. And so the price that we pay for our dignity as human beings is the indignity we bring upon ourselves by sin. That's a very appealing approach. It's one which I think a lot of people hold. I know a lot of people hold, and even many of us may have held it for a long time. I used that approach for many years as a college student. That makes sense. God granted Adam the freedom to go one way or the other, and the price of giving him that freedom was leaving the door open for corn to be planted rather than strawberries. You can't expect, now that corn's been planted, for God to raise up strawberries. And so now we live, because of the freedom of man, which is better than having a world full of automatons, because of the freedom of man, we live in an evil world. I want you to reflect on that for a minute. See if you can come up with the difficulty there. It sounds very orthodox. In fact, for the most part, it is orthodox. God did allow Adam to choose for himself.
Then in what areas is God really free?
Well, I think a person would say here that God was still God when Adam freely fell into sin. Nevertheless, Adam freely did it within the plan of God, and Adam is responsible for that. And let's say this is all orthodox up to this point. Adam is the immediate cause of his sin. God is not the author of evil, even though God predestined it. God is not the one who forced Adam to evil against his will, drug him into the realm of evil. Adam did it willingly, and therefore Adam's responsible for it. Now, if God wanted men to have the dignity of free agents, and then Adam made the wrong choice, then we have evil. But God is not to be blamed for that. Well, the difficulty is found, I think, very well in the chapter on free will in the Westminster Confession of Faith. This is chapter 9, and I'm going to read for you section 5. Section 5 of the chapter on free will. It's one sentence. It says, "The will of man is made perfectly and immutably free to do good alone in the state of glory only." What is the background to this statement? Well, in the garden, man was free to do good, free to do evil. After the fall, man is not free to do good. With redemption and regeneration, man is now free again to do good or to do evil. But what about heaven? What about the eternal state? In the state of glory only will the will of man be made perfectly and immutably free to do good alone. What the confession is teaching, and I think it's very biblical, what it's teaching is that men are not going to sin in the state of glory. They will immutably and freely choose to do the good throughout all eternity. Notice that man's freedom is consistent with immutable good choices, that he never alters that. He always chooses the good throughout eternity, but he does so freely. Ask yourself this question. When we go to heaven and we're made perfect, does that mean we're going to be made robots? We're going to lose our human freedom? We're going to lose our dignity as human beings? We're not going to have that volition that we have now? No, we're going to have volition. We're going to be like we are now, but we're going to be sinless. What does that indicate? That indicates that God can be in ultimate control, that we can be free, and we can immutably do the good. That situation is logically possible. In fact, it's the one we're anticipating, where we as free human beings will do the good and only the good throughout all eternity. But if we can have our freedom and immutable goodness, then the question is, why didn't God make it that way from the start? Now do you see the ultimate problem of the free will defense? If man's free will is compatible with him always doing the good, why didn't God give him free will and always make him do the good? Why didn't God, if you will, bring heaven on earth to begin with, if you want to put it that way? So the free will defense is ultimately inadequate also. Well, I hope that at this point you would all be somewhat upset if I said, let's close up the books and go home. Yes, that's right. This is not appropriate, teacher. We don't want to stop now. If you were willing to stop, you obviously are not taking the problem of evil seriously, or you haven't caught on to the fact that all these traditional answers are not good answers. They are not adequate answers. Well, then what are we going to say? Well, I'm suggesting that the presuppositional approach can answer the problem of evil, can show that it is not logically incompatible to have a good God who is all-powerful and an evil world.